Hi, welcome back to another episode of Nobody's Doing It Right, the podcast for those who are uncertain. My name is Kat. I am your host. For today's episode, we're going to talk about why you should stop idealizing your partners, because it will make you act inauthentically in order to try to sustain something that you don't think you're good enough to be worthy of. And we're going to obviously go into more detail about this, but basically, obviously, when you're dating someone, you're getting to know somebody, there is a level of romanticization that goes into it, right? There's a level of excitement. You start maybe daydreaming, thinking about the future, thinking about what could be, what you want to happen, all that stuff, right? And sometimes we can forget to look at the actual present moment and decide if that person is actually who we think they are or who we want them to be, if they're actually exhibiting the behaviors, the actions, whatever, that is aligned with us, right? We have to make sure that in the moment, that is all aligned with who we want and what we want to experience. We forget that sometimes when we start romanticizing and idealizing our partners. But I get it. It's hard not to, right? Because you get excited. So I'm not like shaming anyone for doing this. But I think it's really important to catch yourself if you do recognize yourself doing this. Because what's happening, right? Or what could potentially happen, just from my own experience and the things I've talked about with friends, you start then, because you're looking at this person in an idealized way, you're putting them on a pedestal, you're romanticizing them, you'll start acting in a way that you think this idealized person will want someone to act. You'll act in sort of accordance with a character that you've created, because you don't think that you are good enough as you are, being who you are right now, to match this person that you've idealized and in the way you've idealized them, the way you've romanticized them and this fantasy that you've created about them. You don't think you're good enough now to be worthy of having that person. So then you'll start acting like a character of who you think is worthy of this idealized person. Now, the tricky part of this is that the idealized person you've created in your mind is not probably who that person actually is in real life. It's the romanticized version of them, the heightened version of them that you've created in your head because you've gotten excited, you really want someone like that. Maybe you're looking to be saved a little bit in your life. Maybe your life's feeling unsatisfying in many ways, and having a partner who's this knight in shining armor or whatever would make you feel a lot better about your life. Like, there's so many factors that play into this, right? And everybody's different. So I'm not saying that this is going to fit everybody the same way. But when you romanticize a person like this and you create them to be this almost godlike figure, and you don't feel necessarily good enough, you don't feel equal to them, right? Because if you had been equal to them in your mind, they wouldn't be on a pedestal. They'd be on your level, right? So they wouldn't be romanticized, they wouldn't be idealized. You don't feel good enough or worthy enough of having them as you are. So what happens is you start acting inauthentically, different than who you actually are, in order to be the person that you think they would want. Now, of course, this is unsustainable. You cannot be this kind of person forever because you are not that person. So basically, you're creating this entire relationship on a foundation of lies, right? On a foundation of inauthenticity, which is going to crumble eventually. And what's going to happen when it crumbles is it's going to reinforce the belief you have that you are not good enough, that you're not worthy, that you are an awful person, you're not, a good partner, you're not smart enough, you're not funny enough, whatever. Because you've based the entire relationship, every interaction you've had with this person on an inauthentic character that you've created, just to prove to yourself that they would want you, to convince them to want you. But what happens is people want authenticity most of the time, right? Of course. We gravitate, I think, to people who feel very genuine. And the ironic thing is that we want genuine people, but we forget that we also have to be genuine too, in order to attract and gravitate towards those people. So they realize that maybe you're not acting like yourself, or the character that you're acting like, maybe they start realizing, you know what, I can't live up to this person, or this person's seeing me in a way that's a little too idealized, and I can't live up to that expectation they have of me. And then they leave, or they pull away, or it just doesn't flow anymore because it's just not authentic. There's no foundation that's strong enough to sustain this. And so they leave, they pull away. Exactly what you feared happening has happened now. And now you feel like, yeah, see, I am not good enough. I'm not worthy enough. I knew it. But it's almost in your hands this entire time, right? And it's all due to the fact that you've idealized this person in your mind. So I've done this. I know other people have done this, of course. And it's so important to be mindful of when you do this and to let yourself see the truth of who people are. Accept that they are human, that they are fallible. Let them show you the things about them that are ugly and imperfect, and Let them, make you upset sometimes. Let them do things that aren't amazing all the time. It's okay. It's okay to see their humanness. Now, I know it's hard to do that if you are looking for a savior in many ways. If you're looking for a fantasy, it's hard to let yourself see the reality because you don't want the reality. You don't want the messiness of life. You want the fantasy. You want the idealization of a perfect partner, maybe from like a rom-com or something. So it's hard to see the reality, but you need to. And ultimately, when you do start seeing the real, raw truth, the ugly truth of people, you actually are more liberated, I think, and you end up cultivating relationships that are built, on a genuine foundation. And that feels better long term because you don't have to show up in any other way other than how you are in order to maintain that relationship, to maintain that connection. And that's so much easier than having to keep up a false facade to maintain this connection, to be the kind of person that you think they would want you to be. You just have to be yourself at that point and accept that your faults and failures and imperfections are fine in order to then accept theirs and vice versa. So it really starts with being okay with yourself, to be as authentic as you are and accept that you are flawed and fallible and not always perfect, and practice being okay with that in order to then see it in other people and accept it in others, because otherwise you will idealize them, probably in the many ways that you also idealize yourself, right? Or maybe put a lot of pressure on yourself to be perfect, to always be doing things or to be right or whatever. That's not sustainable for you either long term, to have that pressure on you all the time, because you're not. You exist as you are. And that doesn't mean you can't grow, change, improve in many ways. Of course you can. Like, that's the point of life too. But also accepting that there are things about you that are going to be imperfect because you're human. Humans are imperfect. They're messy. They're flawed. That's part of life. So if you can't see it in yourself, you won't be able to then accept it and see it in other people. And then you'll end up idealizing them. You'll judge them a lot. You'll put a lot of pressure on them to live up to the standard that you've been putting on yourself. And then what happens is it doesn't last. It crumbles because it's not built on a strong, genuine foundation where you can just exist and show up authentically, because it's easier to do it that way. It's more sustainable. It's not so much effort to maintain this fictional character all the time. When, if you're being inauthentic, if you're trying to be this perfect version of yourself, what happens is you get exhausted. It's very exhausting. And that's why you might see people who pull away after being like this heightened version of themselves, that they come off as like they're perfect all the time or whatever. And you see them pull away, you see them disappear, you see them isolate. Sometimes that could be why. And I say this because I've experienced this at times. I've gone through these cycles too. And I've also experienced it from the other side of someone acting that way towards me and then seeing it and being like, why did they change up? Like, they acted one way for a month and then they stopped acting that way. What happened? What did I do? Right? And usually our instinct is to think that we did something to make them change. It's like, no, they were probably showing up in a way that was inauthentic, and then the reality came out. Of course, there's nuance to this. There's many reasons why people go through situations that cause them to pull away or to isolate, or they go through slumps. Like, obviously there's a lot of mental health struggles, of course, but I'm just saying that this can be one of those reasons sometimes. And I've noticed it in myself, in the way I show up at times. And I've noticed it happening from other people after I've asked them about it, right? And it's really fascinating. It's really interesting to see. So start with looking at yourself. Start with looking at the ways you idealize yourself. You try to put yourself on a pedestal. You put pressure on yourself to be this, perfect person all the time. And then see if you are doing that to other people too. If you're idealizing your partners and then showing up in an inauthentic way, that's obviously going to be really, really, really hard to sustain, because you're not perfect. You're not idealized. You're not a godlike figure. You are human, and that's okay. But I think ultimately the best relationships are the ones that you can actually both coexist in your, your awfulness, your wretchedness, your messiness, your grossness, and also see the good in each other and accept the bad. And, try to change the things you can, but accept the things you can't. And that's it. And that's the most you can do. And I know that can be really hard for those of us who are doers, who are perfectionists, to accept, to be okay with our flaws and our fallibilities all the time. But that's literally the only thing you can do. That's the only way to really find some peace and solace in this experience of life, because otherwise you're always going to be striving to be perfect and to be this idealized version of yourself. And then you're going to seek it in other people, and it doesn't exist. People are going to be imperfect, and that's okay. But you're going to torture yourself in the process of trying to find that all the time. And then every time it crumbles and it doesn't work out, it's just going to reinforce the idea of, I'm not good enough. But the only way to prove to yourself that you are good enough, that you are worthy of love, care, consideration, is to believe it in yourself first and allow yourself to see it in others and accept that they are worthy and you are worthy regardless of flaws and imperfections. So I hope this was helpful. I hope it was informative. If you want to follow my social media, all the links will be down below. I have a Substack where I write about these things that you can follow as well. And yeah, you can book a one-to-one call with me if you're interested. I also offer email guidance if you want to ask me a question. But other than that, thank you for listening, and I'll be back again soon with another episode.